be able to manage our resources in everyday life. The same thing applies to groundwater. So, other reasons for doing that, apart from resource management, salinity is driven by increased recharge and discharge. The risk of groundwater contamination is dependent on recharge rates. A management of groundwater-dependent ecosystems requires an understanding of discharge processes. This is not only land-locked ones, but marine groundwater discharge coming out of the ecosystems well out into the ocean are also important, and these have to be considered in some analyses. And groundwater modelling requires recharge as an input and the definition of recharge areas. And this causes one hell of a problem for the modellers who throw their hands up and say, what's the recharge? Now recharge is the amount of water getting into an aquifer, and I explained this yesterday, during a given period of time. It may be over a broad area. We're just measuring rainfall here. It may be in a small area like a domestic home supply, runoff from a roof, or from streams. Generally, this is a graphical representation of what we have with groundwater. Recharge comes through, some's held in the unsaturated zone, some's taken up by the trees, and what gets down into the aquifer is what we're defining as recharge. So it can be, and discharge on the other hand is what's going out of the aquifer up into the atmosphere by some means or other. It could be by means of evaporation from a lake where water's discharging into that lake, could be by trees acting as pumps, could be from irrigation, could be as base flow coming into streams, or natural discharge from town water supplies or saturated areas, high water table, near build-up areas. So again, we have that water balance, recharge minus discharge, change of storage. If we have too much of one or the other, the water levels change, the water volumes change. So the recharge and discharge processes are variable in both time and space. We have here diffuse recharge, where it's over a wide area. Generally, it's a very small runoff there. The water will seep down immediately or directly into the aquifers underneath. If there's an impermeable layer between the aquifers, that we will have overland flow on a broader scale. It can be local or point source recharge from streams or holes. Some means we might have recharge bores putting in there, but these are more localised than the diffuse. We can have a combination of both, where we have wide area rainfall, diffuse recharge occurring, and also stream flow causing an increase of recharge adjacent to those streams. Evaporation can cause diffuse discharge over a broader area, and can also have point source discharge, say pumping water out of the artesian basin or smaller pumps on a broader scale, or even mound springs such as you have in the northern part of South Australia. I think this is the Bubbler mound spring on the old Garn railway line from Maree over to Idada. This one here is an uncontrolled artesian bore in the Northern Territory, McDill's bore, and it had a very big pool around it. They finally located the bore and reconditioned it. It took them 5 years, and it wasn't because of the difficulty of the task, but their budget only allowed them a certain amount of work each year. So they built a ramp out to the bore, managed to get their drilling rig out there, located the bore, put mud and cement, or mud down there to kill the flow, put an inert casing down, cemented around that, controlled the bore, and just diverted a small amount of water, about 200 metres away, to water the camels who were relying on this. That it's been controlled. Trees are also a source of discharge from groundwater and base flow into creeks. This is the base flow is this major part of some of the creek flows in our country. There is, now I'll probably get excommunicated for this, but there's some thought around Australia, some of the hydrologists, that all groundwater is associated with surface water. Surface water is paramount, therefore groundwater should be banned. Groundwater use should be banned. We only have 2 perennial streams in Queensland. If groundwater was banned, we wouldn't have any use of water at all. So you have to treat this sensibly, look at what, admittedly, groundwater and surface water are interacting in many areas. In some areas they're not. But each resource should be treated in its own right, and also conjunctively when they're required to do so.
So does that mean that those other aquifers don't get replenished if they don't interact
with the surface water? No, they can be replenished by rainfall.
Yep.
But their levels may be below the stream level.
Yep.
Now they may have been drawn down by extra use, which means that the stream may be discharging into them as well, or many other reasons. But each case should be treated on its own merits and just find out what is going on. But to give a blank statement that surface water depends on groundwater, surface water is paramount, you can't use any groundwater, is silly, as is the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay, coastal discharge is also important. Fresh water is a lower density than salt water. Salt water is about 1.025 specific gravity, fresh water is 1.000. So it tends to float on the salt water, but we do have a zone there of mixing. Fresh water, we have a water table here, as you learned yesterday, a gradient in the water table causes a flow. The fresh water flows out to the sea, and the salt water tends to act as a buffer there. There is a zone of mixing, but Guy van Hersberg, those two fellows researching a long time ago, just by using the density differentials, said or found that for every 1 metre that the water table is above mean sea level, you get out another 40 metres before you encounter the salt water. And that's just by density differentials. But it also applies solely to a hydrostatic condition where there is no movement. Because we have a gradient, it implies and must follow that there is a movement of fresh water. Because we have a gradient here, we must have a movement of salt water. So in the notes that you have on the groundwater hydraulics in chapter 11, I've covered saltwater intrusion fairly thoroughly and given you an example of a dynamic situation where the two wedges are moving and how you can determine the length of that wedge and the depth of them and the discharges out as well. So it's not just a straight comparison of densities there, but also other gradients. If the saltwater wedge is moving in, then you must have a saltwater gradient in this direction for that flow to occur. You can have groundwater discharging out into the sea. Here at Coburn Sound in West Australia, we have nitrates coming out into the ocean. You can see the plume there, and this is contaminating. We've all seen on the beaches, water flowing across the beaches. This is groundwater coming across the beaches from that saltwater, freshwater interface and flowing out to the sea. So, factors affecting recharge. Natural recharge depends on a number of factors, including the availability of water for recharge. So that's a primary thing. We must have water to recharge. There's a temporal and spatial distribution of recharged water. So if we have a great amount of water occurring at one time, obviously the ground level, the ground won't be able to absorb it, so most of that will run off. Okay, so we're better off having a lower rainfall rate over an extended period of time to get a better recharge. So the topography will also determine the magnitude of the recharge. If we have very steep topography, it will promote a greater runoff, and more so than if we have flat topography, the runoff much slower, have a greater time for recharge to occur. The ability of the surface material and recharge area to accept water is also paramount. If we have an area of clay pan, the water won't get in, but a sandy area will absorb the water far better. Groundwater levels at the time of the recharge event are also important. If the aquifer is full, you won't get any recharge because you can't have that fuller than full. If they're down low, we may in fact get a greater component of recharge. And also the ability of the aquifer to distribute the water received is important. Once it gets in there, we must be able to transmit it to other parts of the aquifer as well. Otherwise it's going to fill up very, very quickly in that local zone. So all of those reasons are important on how recharge is effective. Now, how do we affect the recharge and discharge? Clearing of trees obviously removes humps, so the amount of water being discharged is also reduced. But it also opens up the area and promotes greater surface water runoff, so the amount of recharge is therefore reduced as well. So it's a combination. We may reduce the discharge, but also reduce the recharge capability by clearing. Engineering structures can also have impacts on recharge and discharge. If we're holding up a lot of water here, we're reducing the amount of water which is available in creeks and streams to recharge the groundwater event. These are just other examples of us using the water. Groundwater use can affect the volume in storage and hence the recharge and discharge. Urbanisation has a big impact because if we start building roads, roofs and other things, there isn't as great an exposure to the surface material, therefore recharge is reduced. Urban recharge can be affected by getting runoff from roofs, putting it into the aquifers. Unfortunately, the rainwater is not the only thing which goes through. Urban runoff also includes extra fertilisation or fertilisers from the soils, insecticides and other things which go down into the soil and can contaminate the aquifer. These things eventually find their way there and can impact deleteriously on the groundwater situation. Artificial or managed recharge is sometimes necessary because we may have an inadequate groundwater supply for the use required. That's one thing, so we do it to augment the inadequate supplies. Or you may have drawn down the water level in the groundwater close to the ocean and you're getting seawater intrusion, which is unacceptable. We may need to stem that intrusion by either building a groundwater mound along the seafront to stop the water coming in, or a groundwater depression to intercept some of that seawater and groundwater and take it off. Or we may want to remove suspended solids by infiltration by taking some surface water, recharging into the groundwater, using the natural filter there and taking it off as bad water elsewhere. I was in Israel in 1984, and Israel uses about 120% of their natural water resources, and they do this by recharging their sewage effluent, mainly in the Tel Aviv area, and they put it straight down into the aquifer, withdrawn about 100 or 200 metres away by means of bores, and that distance allows adequate travel time and time under there for die time to get rid of the viruses and the bacteria. But they're not really confident about that, so that water which is then taken down to the Negev is only used on food which is going to be cooked before eating. They're not allowed to use that water on anything which is eaten straight out of the ground. So you can recharge then to reutilise the excess water supply. You may also store cyclic surpluses for use in dry periods. I'll show you some examples shortly of conjunctive use in the Callard Valley and other areas in Queensland where the groundwater supply is used predominantly, but the surface water is not all that frequent. So they use the groundwater, it goes down, they build storages to catch the surface water when it comes, but they immediately transfer that surface water by means of recharge weirs down into the groundwater, put it into the bigger storage system, and then leave the surface water system partially empty to catch the next recharge event or next inflow event when it does occur. But they use both systems conjunctively. So conjunctive use implies the use of artificial recharge. When you're using surface water and groundwater together, it's not necessarily conjunctive use. I regard that as combined use. Conjunctive use does involve artificial recharge into the groundwater system as well. You may need to recharge sometimes to prevent land subsidence resulting from excessive groundwater or oil extraction. Again, in California, around Los Angeles, they used to employ a lot of surveyors. They put them over a trial area before employing them. And when 12 had failed at this simple course, 12 in a row, they went out and checked it, and the course had subsided in one area. The land surfaces had subsided. This was mainly because the groundwater extraction in the area had reduced the pore pressure that Charles and I were talking about yesterday, so the intergranular pressure increased and the land went down. So they may have, in some areas, if it's important, have to pump water into the ground to prevent that land subsidence. In San Diego, again in California, the subsidence was so great they had to build a levee along the seafront to stop the water coming into the yacht squad in the yacht club. In some cases, the land cost is very, very high, so it's going to cost an awful lot to resume land to take water supply into city areas, and it's much cheaper to inject the water into an aquifer, use the aquifer as a distributary system, and pump it out somewhere else. So all of these reasons are reasons for artificial recharge. or managed aquifer recharge, whichever you want to call it these days. The common methods of artificial recharge are use of recharge pits, recharge trenches, recharge bores, stream bed spreading and off-stream water spreading. We'll have a look at a couple of those. This is a recharge bore, and I think systems like this may be used in parts of South Australia at present. Aquifer storage and retrieval, I think they might be called, I'm not sure.
They use that down at, just before you go to the salts place there's a whole lot of wetlands where they put the water through the wetlands and then pump it down.
Yeah.
At Salisbury.
Salisbury, is it?
Yeah, the Salisbury Council.
Aquifer storage and recharge, they're calling it, is it?
Yeah, and that's Colin Pittman. You heard of him? Colin Pittman, the engineer for Salisbury Council.
Okay, well, they're pumping that in periods of excess water and storing it there. Then in the dry season, they pump it out again. So they're just using the aquifer there as a storage. In some cases, they may have a poorer quality water going in and they pump it from elsewhere, either as a mixed better quality water or as a far better quality water elsewhere. This is a situation of the Berri Delta up in North Queensland, where the Berri River comes through here. It is a delta. Over the tens of thousands of years, the river has changed courses in the same manner as deltas are formed. But it floods fairly frequently. It's a very rich sugar-growing area. It's also affected by saltwater recharge along here. In 1964, we were doing an analysis here, and we found that people in the area were using about 260,000 acre feet. We'll call them megalitres today, just to confuse the units a bit. We'll say it was 260,000 megalitres per annum. We did an analysis of the basin there and found that its safe yield, or sustainable yield, was around about 160,000. So they were using 100,000 megalitres per annum more than was sustainable. So one way of doing this, overcoming this, was to recharge the unregulated flow of the Berri River and divert it into channels or pits in there and allow it to soak down and recharge. So we did this by putting a pumping station here and at the rocks and pumping water into channels here. This area wasn't as easy to get to the aquifer, so in some areas we had to dig trenches down through the material, backfill them with sand and let the water seep down into the aquifer. Other areas we had spreading pits, but in most of the area we just dug the trenches through the sand and the water got in. So that was the way of doing it on the south side. On the north side, we also had another pumping station here on the south side. On the north side, we'll put one pumping station there at Plantation Creek and pump water into Plantation Creek and allowed it to soak in. We'll put another one on the north side here at Sheep Station Creek, and the water just soaked into those. And it's been working satisfactorily for the last 40, 50 years. Recently, though, we have built Berri Falls Dam well upstream, and it now has regulated water, so they're pumping regulated water supply into there. That's the sort of sand pit, the trench that I was talking about. We had clay there, we dug through that, and that filled with sand that allows the water to go in. These need to be cleaned out every so often because you will get fine material and build up on the top, so you need to maintain these recharge areas. In the same area in the Berri, it's quite a wide, it was about 800 metres wide, I think, the river. It's quite wide, but it's very, very sandy. But it also has very rapid and huge flows, so the riverbed can change up to 10 metres in some places as the sand becomes mobile during the flows. So in order to use the flows which were coming down at low flow, we built these sand dams across there to increase the contact time of the river and the water recharged into the aquifers adjacent to it. These are some of the water level contours we took alongside just a sand dam we built across there, and this resulted in these water level rises just adjacent to the dam. So we're getting some water moving out into those aquifers in that way as well. In the Lockyer Valley, there are 19 artificial recharge weirs, but being an engineering firm, we decided to build them properly. So we put cheap steel piling down and everything like that. So when the flows came, the flows reduced here and all the sediments dropped out, and we promptly removed the recharge capabilities of the stream immediately upstream of them. The best way of doing this is done in Los Angeles again, the Los Angeles River, by using inflatable or temporary temporary recharge weirs. They had two inflatable weirs across the river there, one filled with water, one with air. So they would deflate them for the first flush. That flush would come down, take all the sediments that were behind there before, inflate them for the next flow, and they'd get a better recharge. So I'd suggest if you're building artificial recharge weirs, just build them out of timber logs or something like that that can be removed. Take them out for the first flush, drop them back in. It doesn't matter if they leak. They're not there to store water. They're there to increase the head to allow the water to get back into the aquifer a bit more effectively. So this here is a conjunctive using the Cali Valley I was telling you about before. This is quite a useful shallow alluvial deposit which comprises a number of creeks leading into Cali Creek. But it's a rain channel. We built Cali Dam there in 1965 and never lost one day because of one day's work because of rainfall. And all the time during that construction, the yield of the dam kept on getting smaller and smaller. So the dam was built, but because the place is in a rain shadow, we built a channel coming across from Cali Creek to Coomba Creek and another one across to Caribou Creek, and with small weirs there. So we're diverting water from Cali Dam into the upper reaches of these creeks and recharging the groundwater as well as releasing it down into Cali Creek. So this is truly a conjunctive use scheme we're using there with artificial recharge. This is the Lockyer Valley I mentioned before, where we have 19 recharge weirs in there. You wouldn't think they were needed on the basis of the reports from the Lockyer Valley over the last couple of months with that enormous flood came through, but it's normal. This here is a recharge weir in Three Moon Creek near Monto in central Queensland, and these are the water level responses around that creek. You'll see that the water level will come around and back into the creek there, but it is affecting and impacting the aquifers further upstream. So common problems associated with artificial recharge include sedimentation. You're slowing down the water, you will get the fines settling on the top, so you need to maintain them. Algae growth can be occurring there as well, so you need to rest them so often, let that die off, and then just scrape off about half a centimetre or stuff and you clean them out. So that's what I mentioned there. Recharge bores need to be pumped periodically to clean them. Now we were showing the cone of depression from the pumping bores yesterday. If you have a recharge bore, the cone of impression is the mirror image of that. Now with a cone of depression, you're getting water from well out, which has been filtered before it comes to the bore, so we're getting basically clean water coming up. If we're pumping down into a recharge bore, we're having normal water, which is going firstly into the screen area, and that acts as a filter, and it's going to clog up with time. So every so often, you need to pump it the other way to clean that out again. You can see when this is necessary by looking at the water level, draw up I suppose, curves and the rate of inflow. And that's, initially it will be fairly high, but it will drop off the rate of inflow when at a certain time you can just reverse the flow and clean it out. So approaches for recharge and discharge. For the hydrologic zone, all zones we can use a water budget to determine these things. In the saturated zone we can use water table fluctuation, water level fluctuations, Darcy's law, traces, environmental traces, numerical modelling. The unsaturated zone is more difficult to deal with. Lysimeters, Darcy's law again in a certain way, traces, and again modelling, and for surface water we can do that. Now the flux ranges in which these different types are used, the saturated zone we can take from fairly small flows right through. For the unsaturated zone, this just gives an indication of where the particular types are required, and flux is just a rate of flow. The spatial scales, now in the shallow alluvial deposits or the deltaic deposits in Queensland, we would normally have a rainfall event, we'd see recharge occurring. In some of the areas in southern Australia with different recharge events and different topography, you may in fact have tens of thousands of years before a recharge event's noted. Is this right, Charles? You're getting longer periods of time. So you can't use the same sort of recharge analysis in all of the zones. And this gives an idea of the types of analyses which are suitable for those zones. Okay? Sorry, that's areas. This one here applies to the time zones. So we're looking at years here. It's from 0.1 over to 10,000 years and the types of analyses which are applicable today. So the groundwater techniques which are useful in looking at recharge events, there are water table fluctuations, and these will deal with hydrographs, etc. Just simple Darcy's law, traces to find out the rates of travel, chemical mass balance and numerical modelling. So they're each suitable for different data sets, timescales and spatial scales as we're showing on those previous graphs. But it is best not to just use one, but to use a couple of techniques to check them out. Okay. So shallow bore can be used where the water table or water level is fluctuating and we're getting rises going up and down like that, and also water chemistry can be used there. And that implies water movement directly down into the aquifer. So if we match the groundwater hydrograph against the groundwater mass residual rainfall curve, we can see whether direct rainfall is having an impact as recharge. Now, some of you may not be familiar with the rainfall residual mass curve. I've explained it again in detail in the management section of those notes. But all it means is that, well, firstly, our rainfall records are normally much, much longer than our water level records. Okay, we may go back 100 odd years with rainfall records, and maybe at best we might have 20, 30, in some cases 60 years of water level records for groundwater. So we do have better records for rainfall. Now, the idea of the rainfall residual mass curve is we take the rainfall events, and probably monthly rainfalls are the best ones to use. Daily rainfalls are far too short. Annual rainfalls mean nothing because of our climate in Australia. But monthly rainfall time period is pretty good. So if we go to the Bureau, we get the monthly rainfalls for a gauging station or a rainfall station near the area that we're working, or a couple of measuring stations near there. We can get all of these monthly records, make sure there are no gaps in there. If there are gaps, the best idea is to fill in that gap by getting an idea of what the rainfall would be in that year on the basis of other years and how that year is going itself. But take all the Januaries from that record and get the average January rainfall, okay, for maybe 100 years, 120 years. Then get all the February rainfalls and all the March rainfalls. Get the average for all of those. Then you have a series of 12 average monthly rainfalls for each of those months. Then we go to the start of the period and we compare the actual monthly rainfall for January with the average, and we get a difference, either a higher or lower, and we record that. Then we move to February and compare the actual February rainfall with the average February, and again we get an increase or a decrease, and we add that onto the one from January, and we get a cumulative build-up of excess of rainfall for the whole period. Now that excess may be positive or negative depending on whether the rainfall was less or more. So we build up a residual mass curve, or a cumulative deviation from the mean, a residual mass curve of rainfall for the whole period. Now we find, because this residual mass curve is really an indication of the excess of rainfall above the mean, and if rainfall is then the main source of recharge, if we have a mean rainfall, the recharge of water levels are going to stay reasonably constant. If we have periods of excess rainfall, the recharge is going to occur. Periods of low rainfall, then the water levels will fall. So what we're going to end up with is that our water levels, groundwater levels, should reflect the residual mass curve shape. It won't be exact because, and you can't use it as a quantitative thing, because we may have periods of enormous rainfall which will impact the residual mass, but the aquifer may have been full, so you won't have as big a recharge. But if you find, in looking at your water level plots then, say you're plotting water levels over a period of time, and these are reflected in the rainfall residual mass curve, you can say quite confidently, rainfall is contributing to this recharge in this area. And you can go a step further. In central Queensland, where I've done a bit of work, the people are not happy with the mining companies taking coal out and destroying the land. I can understand this. But the mining companies, according to the locals, are responsible for everything. That tsunami over in Sumatra in 2004, mining companies caused that, and the great flood of Noah. These mining companies are terrible. Anyway, they were blaming them for everything. So I had to go out and talk with a lot of these landowners, and I had this residual mass curve and their water levels. I was able to show them that their declines in water levels were in fact results of climatic impact rather than the mining. If the mining impact was there, it would go. And it does on occasions. You can see that. But the residual mass curve is a very, very useful tool for the hydrologists to use. I'll show you some of it shortly. This is just a hydrograph showing water table fluctuations. Okay. So we can estimate the recharge from water level changes. The recharge is equal to the change in groundwater storage, which is the specific yield by the change of head. Now, if you have recharge in a confined aquifer, it may also be as a result of rainfall, but may have taken a bit longer to get there. In that case, you'd be looking at storage coefficient there rather than specific yield. Okay, and that's what we have. So this here is just a simple hydrograph showing the water levels. These are rainfall events. The back bit there is a result of an irrigation event. So excess irrigation has gone down and caused a rise in the groundwater level. One of the other things you'll notice, if you have an area of groundwater, the number of observation bores around, the water levels in the observation bores will drop off slowly like that. And regardless of what the reason for the rise in water level, if the water level gets up to a certain point in that bore, it's going to drop off at the same rate. Recharge again. So you're going to end up, for each bore in that area, a recession curve, which will reflect or indicate the way in which that bore is going to decline with time. Much the same as you have for your logarithmic scale with a drawdown in a bore. This is a drawdown in a field, and you're getting a recession curve. And it's going to happen the same way in that same bore all the time. It'll be different for another bore, but in that other bore, it will also be constant as well. Okay? So that's the sort of thing we're getting here. Okay? A milder slope there than what this one is, but this is going to come down like that, and if we took that over, we'd find that that is going to be there. Okay. I reckon that the seasonal rise in waters have only where rainfall is very seasonal, which we have up north, you may not have here. Response to individual events, storm, flood, irrigation, that's fine. And the problems, it excludes groundwater drainage, but you can take this into account. Excludes groundwater extraction, again you can take this into account. And responses can be indistinct. And damping, that may be right, but again I think you can analyse for that if you know that you have to look for it. And effective porosity may change with depth and time, but that's all right, and this is taken into account with that depletion curve. It will take it into account. Here we have the blocks, rainfall events, the dots, groundwater level events at Home Hill up in the Berri Delta. Now you can see here first of all the number of measuring points there in the groundwater is far less than what we have in rainfall. But so we do have to use a bit of imagination and extend these things. That one there obviously went up a bit higher than that. So, but we can analyse that. This is only going back to 79. I did an analysis in 1964 of Clayton's bore, and we went back to 1935. And on the basis of that, I did the analysis of the Berri Delta. But we went right back and were able to analyse what was going on, look at critical periods in the rainfall events for the area, and go back and determine what the sustainable yield was for the Berri Delta on the basis of those critical yields. But this here is a typical groundwater level response, or rainfall level response, or typical hydrograph. Now, I said yesterday a hydrograph was just a plot, a temporal plot of any water event. It may be rainfall, stream flow, groundwater level, water chemistry. The hydrograph is a plot at one point over a period of time, whereas our contours are a plot of a number of points at a snapshot in time. Okay, well this is a typical hydrograph. So analysing that, we're able then to look at the recharge events and look at the rainfall events. Now, the way I did this was to do it on a monthly timescale. So I took the monthly rainfall, and if the rainfall extended over one block, they might have had 7, 8 inches or so, going from the 29th of January over to the 4th of February. But I took a 30-day period there to make sure those blocks were in. But these are blocks of monthly rainfall, whether they be 30-day periods or a calendar month. If they're all the calendar month, that's fine. And we plotted up the recharge against that. We found that this curve or plot resulted, and it's not too bad. If you only had those, you're in a bit of strife, but we do have some fairly big events there. So using that, we find, first of all, that recharge didn't occur unless we had 6 inches of rain a year, in a month. So it was being absorbed in the unsaturated zone used by trees, etc. But anyway, using that, we're able then to go back and analyse this from the year 1896 or something like that. And with the rainfall, we could then, by 1893 was an enormously wet year in Queensland, we could go from there and assume the aquifer was full. And using the depletion curve we got from this, start drawing down, and with the rainfall recharge correlation here, with the rainfall event occurred, we took the monthly rainfall and went up. So we ended up with a water level response for a bore in the area, and it went through, we were able to determine the area which was the driest, the critical period. We can analyse the aquifer on the basis of that and determine the long-term sustainable yield. So you can do this. There's little point in plotting yearly rainfall, because you may have had all of your rainfall in one month, nothing for the rest, and the response in the groundwater is quite different. I think monthly is a very good timescale. This here is another example of the Isaac River catchment, again in central Queensland, where these are rainfalls, and that there I think might be progressive average annual rainfalls as we're going through. Average rainfalls mean nothing in Australia. Regardless of the recent events, I'm an Australian and I don't believe we have droughts and floods. I believe that sometimes it's extremely dry and sometimes it's extremely wet, but that's normal for us. Whereas droughts and floods are abnormal events. The last few months have been abnormal, I have to admit. But we have to deal with that, so averages mean nothing. Birdsville has an average rainfall of about 200 mils, I think, but they might go for 10, 20 years with no rainfall at all. So what does the average mean? Okay. So, and the same applies in South Australia in the north.
Same here.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
If we didn't give you water every few years to go down there,
we can supply on 3 inches of rain here.
Okay, so here's the residual mass curve for that lot of rainfall that we had here. Okay, now there's the average. Here I've taken and calculated the residual mass curve for all of that rainfall event, and I'll get that sort of response. Okay? Now in addition, at the lot, we have, I think this is a river flow, yes. The Isaac River also flows, and sometimes it flows infrequently, but when it does, it will sometimes cause a recharge event. And that won't necessarily be related to the rainfall of the lot, it might be related to rainfall 100 miles further upstream. Okay, so I'll just shove that in there for a particular reason. Here, we now have the groundwater levels in a bore in that area, okay, and these are the monthly rainfalls. So you can see you're going to get some rises with those monthly rainfalls, and it's a bit hard to do an analysis of it. Here, we have now got those same water level events, and we've superimposed on there the residual mass curve rainfall event for that period from 1968. Now these here, those groundwater levels above there, are probably due to a run in the Isaac River, which wasn't a result of rainfall in this immediate area from which we've got this residual rainfall curve. But that area there, you can see the correlation is excellent. Now we can take that, and using that area there, we've got the residual rainfall going back to 1890. We can then get an idea of what the fluctuation of groundwater levels is likely to have been going back to that period. Not exactly, but we can know what its trend would have been. And this is useful in many, many areas as well. So you can use this to go backwards. Okay, Darcy's law can also be used to determine these flows. I haven't got the units on there of the definitions, apologise. So we're familiar with that. We can get what's coming in, and at Darcy's law we can use them to determine the flow. This is just Q equals Ti by the width of the stream, as we showed yesterday. It can also be used in the unsaturated zone. The unsaturated zone is something that I don't do a lot of work in. It's got a lot of air in it, but the researchers do use Darcy's law in there, and pressures, pore pressures, and also there are other pressures in there too. Pressures little, but they do a lot of work in there that just confuses me. But they're able to determine the flows through. This is what I was looking at, the constant zone of flux matrix pressures and other the capillary pressures and that. They're working at pressures that are less than atmospheric in occasions and getting through. They're quite brilliant people. We can use Darcy's law to determine the flow through the saturated zone, as we showed before. Numerical modelling can be used, but with numerical modelling you do need to know what's going on. Okay. Their biggest cry is, what's the recharge? So I suppose they can do an analysis, and any discrepancy they can attribute to recharge and plug it back in. But, in that other analysis, by the way, I was doing in the vertigan, we did have to take into account the evapotranspiration and other uses as well. So we assumed that the use I was putting in for that depletion curve had the same sort of environmental use and other use as we had during the period of analysis from 1935. Okay, chemical mass balance is also important. I think this may be more important in some of your areas here, but I'll show you very briefly what it's doing. If we have rainfall coming in and we're using chlorine as the indicator, chlorine won't be lost as evaporation occurs. So if we assume in some of these dry areas that all the rainfall is working its way through, some of it's going to be lost with evapotranspiration, but with that evapotranspiration the chlorine is left. But we have rainfall which has a certain chlorine concentration, so your concentration of chlorine is there. You should have the same amount of chlorine in the deeper part here, which is the recharge multiplied by the concentration of the chlorine. So if we measure the rainfall and measure the chloride concentration of that rainfall, and we measure the concentration of chlorine deeper down in the aquifer, by comparison we can then determine what the recharge has been over that period of time. And there's an analysis there which says the recharge was in fact about 0.05 of a millilitre per year, even though the rainfall was 300 millimetres per year. Okay? So that's just the chlorine mass balance. Water balance methods we can use to look at the evapotranspiration from trees. These are the things we have: evapotranspiration, infiltration, surface runoff, deep drainage, recharge into there, and transpiration and rainfall. They're all of the components which are going to contribute to the recharge in the area. So they're shown here as arrows now rather than as graphics. And in that, we're after that recharge value, which is going to the aquifer. There are two parts to this. There's the soil water, or the unsaturated zone. We need a water balance on that. And in that, we have the inputs minus the outputs would be the change in storage. The inputs are the precipitation, minus the rainfall runoff, minus evapotranspiration in the saturated zone, minus the recharge which is moving out of the saturated zone down into the unsaturated zone, down to the saturated zone, and all of that gives us a change of storage in the saturated zone. So the recharge, which is this one, is equal to the precipitation minus the runoff, minus the evapotranspiration, minus the change in storage. Okay. Then we look at the saturated zone with groundwater balance in there, and we can do the same sort of thing again, but we can say the evapotranspiration from the groundwater is going to be negligible. We can also say that the groundwater flow out is negligible or is equal to the groundwater flow in, so that the recharge is actually equal to the change in the groundwater storage, which we can measure. You can also use tracer methods to determine recharge by looking at the age of the water in the various parts of the aquifer. Okay. Again, this is a field that I'm not familiar with, and I mentioned the other day that Habermal and others use chlorine-36 to analyse the age of the water of the GAB. Here's some examples from the Murray. Again, I'm not familiar with these, but are they worth commenting on at this stage, Charles, or just leave it for them?
It's just that you're able to work out the age of different isotopes to different depths, and then if it's gone that sort of depth, and you know the age of the water at that depth, then you can recalculate out the movement of water through there and work out the velocity through the system, and then another approach to working out recharge. I think the key thing is I wouldn't rely on one technique alone.
Okay.
It's worth looking into.
In your chemistry talk, you're talking about nuclear testing?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll skip over a few of these. So looking at renewable rates, the aquifer recharge things. A thing which it does require a little bit of attention, I think, in the unsaturated zone. The use of lysimeters is important, and we're over in New Zealand, we're over Rua before last, and saw a lysimeter in the field in use. Now the idea was that since the recharge in the unsaturated zone is so difficult to determine, they dig a hole and put this container in there, which is able to actually intercept and measure the volume of water which is coming through it, and they take this out and can calculate what's going on there. This is called a lysimeter. They backfill all of this with the material literally exactly the same as what's adjacent to it. They're costly to build, but it may be the only way in some areas for determining what the recharge is for the unsaturated zone. Okay, the tracers can be used as well. This is just some results of the tracers. I think they might be bromine, chlorine, things, chlorine and tritium. Is it all deuterium? Looks like tritium. Okay, numerical modelling can also be used to determine the recharge of Richardson's equation. Familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay.
You're not going to put that up,
No, no. Okay, surface water studies can also be used. We're looking at stream flow. We can measure the stream flow of one area in another and find out what's been lost in between. Okay. So channel losses, we can do much the same as we were looking at with the water budget there before, where we have inflow minus outflow as the change in storage. So we're measuring stream flows in, stream flow out, evapotranspiration out, and then we can analyse the difference and find out what the discharge is into the groundwater. And that's the reverse of what we have in base flow. So there are many different ways of determining recharge and discharge. You can read that. But this is important. Erratic rainfall in Australia means erratic recharge, and in some cases reversals between recharge and discharge. And I think in the next talk I give, I'll show you where some of the streams are losing streams at one time of the year and discharging into the groundwater, and other times the groundwater's higher and the water's discharging into them. And quite frequently the water's stored in the banks for a short period of time too and comes back again. But we can't necessarily base our analyses on European conditions, where a lot of books are written, or even American, because we are quite unique.
Yeah.